The Grand Betrothal. The grand hall of Eldoria hummed with a frantic energy, a symphony of hurried whispers and the rustle of silks. Sunlight, filtered through the stained glass crests adorning the arched windows, cast kaleidoscopic patterns across the polished marble floor. Garlands of white lilies and crimson roses, meticulously woven, draped from every pillar, their heady perfume mingling with the scent of beeswax polish and roasting meats from the kitchens below. Today was the day of King Theron's betrothal to Lady Seraphina, a union decreed by the Royal Council to solidify alliances and bring an end to the simmering border skirmishes with the neighbouring realm of Veritas. Amidst the opulence, Elara, a wisp of a girl in a simple linen dress, felt utterly out of place. Her fingers, usually nimble with needle and thread, trembled slightly as she applied the final buff to the ancient crown of Eldoria. It rested on a velvet cushion on a small, ornate table in a quiet alcove, away from the main thoroughfare of preparation. The gold gleamed under her touch, studded with emeralds and sapphires that seemed to draw the light into their depths. She'd polished it countless times, yet today a strange prickle of heat emanated from its cold metal. A faint pulse, almost imperceptible, thrummed against her fingertips. It wasn't merely the chill of the stone, it was an ancient energy, dormant yet potent. A shiver traced its way down her spine, a mix of awe and trepidation. She quickly withdrew her hand, feeling as though she had disturbed something profound. "Elara, are you quite finished with the crown?" Lord Valerius's voice, a gravelly rumble that could curdle milk, cut through the din. He stood in the archway, his imposing figure framed by the sun-drenched hall. His eyes, the colour of flint, narrowed on the crown, then on Elara. "It must be perfect. The very symbol of our realm cannot be anything less." Elara curtsied deeply, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Yes, my lord, it is ready." Valerius strode forward, his heavy boots echoing on the marble. He cast a critical eye over the crown, then nodded curtly. "Good. See that it is placed upon its pedestal in the antechamber. No one is to touch it until the ceremony." His eyes lingered on her for a moment, a silent warning in their depths, before he turned and disappeared into the throng. Elara carefully lifted the velvet cushion, cradling the crown as if it were spun glass. Its faint warmth persisted, a silent hum against her palms. She hurried towards the antechamber, her heart quickening with each step. King Theron, a figure of quiet strength, stood near the raised dais, his back to the bustling hall. His royal blue tunic, embroidered with the silver falcon of Eldoria, accentuated his broad shoulders. His dark hair was neatly combed, his jaw set in a line of dutiful resolve. He watched the preparations with a detached gaze, his expression unreadable, betraying only a flicker of weariness in his deep-set eyes. He was a king bound by the weight of his crown, a man who bore the mantle of responsibility with stoic grace. Lady Seraphina, a vision in ivory silk and pearls, floated through the hall, a swirl of charm and practiced smiles. Her golden hair, styled in intricate braids, caught the light, and her sapphire eyes sparkled with an almost predatory joy. She moved like a queen already, accepting the fawning compliments of the courtiers with a regal tilt of her head. She paused beside a fountain, its waters splashing softly, and her laughter, like the tinkling of bells, drifted towards Theron. She glanced at him, a subtle invitation in her gaze, but he remained unmoving, a statue carved from duty. Valerius approached the king, his posture stiff. "Your Majesty, all is in readiness. Lady Seraphina is magnificent. The union will be most propitious for Eldoria." Theron finally turned, his gaze sweeping over the lavish display. Indeed, Lord Valerius. Stability is paramount. His voice was deep, resonant, yet held an undercurrent of something unspoken, a quiet resignation. He valued loyalty, and Valerius had always served the kingdom, even if his methods were often cold. Seraphina, seeing her opportunity, glided towards them, her scent of jasmine and rose preceding her. "My king," she murmured, her hand lightly touching his arm. "Are you pleased with the arrangements?" Theron offered a small, polite smile. "They are splendid, Lady Seraphina. You are splendid." He felt the pressure of countless eyes upon them, the weight of expectation. This marriage was not about affection, but about the prosperity of Eldoria. A pragmatic king understood that. Yet, a part of him, a part he rarely acknowledged, longed for something more, something genuine. He caught a glimpse of Alara, depositing the crown on its pedestal in the antechamber. Her head was bowed, her movements precise and unassuming. She seemed to recoil slightly as she placed it, a strange gesture that piqued his curiosity, but then she vanished into the shadows, a humble servant among the grand tapestry of his betrothal. He pushed the fleeting thought away, refocusing on Seraphina's radiant smile. The grand betrothal was about to begin, and a king's duty superseded all else. The crown's choice. The grand hall hummed with the collective breath of Eldoria's elite. Sunlight, filtered through stained glass depictions of ancient kings, painted the polished marble in hues of amethyst and gold. King Theron, robed in crimson and ermine, stood beside the high altar, his gaze fixed on the ceremonial crown of Eldoria, positioned on a velvet cushion. Its intricate filigree gleamed, a silent testament to centuries of rule. Seraphina, a vision in ivory silk and shimmering jewels, glided to his side, her smile a practiced curve of regal charm. Her hand, slender and bejeweled, briefly brushed Theron's arm, a possessive gesture that did not go unnoticed by the assembled courtiers. Lord Valerius, his stern face etched with the weight of tradition, nodded imperceptibly to the high priest. The air thrummed with anticipation. This union was not merely a marriage, it was a cornerstone of Eldoria's future, securing alliances and quelling whispers of unrest. Theron felt the familiar burden settle heavier on his shoulders, a weight he had carried since his father's passing. He reached for the crown, his fingers brushing the cool, aged metal. Just as his fingertips grazed the outermost points of the crown, a low gasp rippled through the front rows. Alara, tasked with ensuring the aisle remained pristine, stumbled. Her worn slipper caught on a loose thread in the ancient tapestry lining the altar steps. A silver chalice, meant to hold consecrated water, wobbled precariously on a nearby stand. In a desperate, unthinking lurch to prevent its fall, her bare hand shot out, her fingers splaying wide. Her palm, still faintly tingling from the strange pulse she'd felt while polishing it, connected with the crown of Eldoria. A blinding golden light erupted, searing white-hot through the grand hall. It wasn't a flash, but a sustained, pulsing radiance that seemed to emanate from the crown itself, engulfing Alara and Theron in its incandescent glow. A guttural cry escaped Seraphina's lips, quickly swallowed by the collective gasp of the court. The light intensified, swirling around Alara, tracing the contours of her simple servant's dress, illuminating the fear in her wide, startled eyes. Theron felt a profound shock course through him, a jolt that went beyond mere surprise. The crown pulsed against his own reaching hand, a thrumming vibration that resonated deep within his bones. Yet the light was centered on Alara, a beacon of impossible brilliance. The high priest stumbled backward, his sacred texts scattering, Courtiers cried out, shielding their eyes from the overwhelming luminescence. Valerius, usually unshakable, reeled, his face a mask of bewildered horror. The ancient stone walls of the hall vibrated with an unseen energy, and the very air crackled with an undeniable power. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light contracted, drawing back into the crown, leaving behind a profound silence. The only sound was the ragged breathing of the assembly and the distant, startled cries of ravens from the castle towers. Elara stood frozen, her hand still resting on the crown, which now seemed to hum with a faint internal glow. Her skin, where it had touched the metal, seemed to shimmer with residual light. Seraphina, regaining her composure, pointed a trembling finger at Elara. "She defiled it!" Her voice, usually so controlled, was shrill, laced with terror and accusation. "She cursed the throne." A murmur of agreement rippled through the stunned crowd. Valerius, his eyes narrowed, took a step towards Elara, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his ceremonial dagger. The air, thick with unspoken dread, felt heavy and cold. King Theron, however, did not move. His gaze, no longer filled with quiet resignation, was fixed on Elara, on the humble servant girl whose touch had awakened the ancient heart of Eldoria. A strange, unfamiliar warmth bloomed in his chest, eclipsing the lingering shock. He felt a profound sense of recognition, a primal stir within him that whispered of destiny, even as the court erupted in terrified whispers of sorcery and sacrilege. Accusations and royal decree. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, ripped through the stunned silence. Seraphina's voice, usually a melodic purr, rose to a furious shriek that sliced through the air like a poisoned dagger. "Sorcery! A curse upon the throne! Seize her!" She pointed a trembling finger at Elara, her perfectly manicured hand shaking with an unbridled fury that distorted her regal features into a mask of pure venom. Chaos erupted. Courtiers, their faces etched with a mix of terror and righteous indignation, recoiled from Elara as if she were a plague carrier. Whispers of witchcraft and defilement spread like wildfire, igniting a panic that threatened to engulf the entire hall. Lord Valerius, his usually composed demeanour shattered, bellowed, "Guards, arrest this harlot. She has tainted the crown, cursed his majesty." His face, usually ruddy with good living, was now pale with a bewildered horror that quickly morphed into aggressive suspicion. Elara, still shimmering faintly with residual golden light, stumbled back, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. The sheer volume of the accusations, the venom in Seraphina's voice, the palpable terror emanating from the assembled nobility. It was overwhelming. She felt like a small animal cornered by a pack of wolves, her breath catching in her throat. But before the guards could surge forward, a voice, deep and resonant, cut through the din. "Stop!" All eyes turned to King Theron. He stood, not in the centre of the unfolding disaster, but slightly to the side, his gaze fixed on Elara. The golden light that had momentarily consumed them both had faded from her, leaving behind only the faintest echo of its brilliance. Yet, something in Theron had shifted. The resignation that had shadowed his eyes for months was gone, replaced by a fierce, almost primal protectiveness. The air crackled around him, not with magic, but with an authority that brooked no argument. "No one touches her," Theron commanded, his voice gaining strength with each word. He stepped forward, placing himself between Elara and the advancing guards, a silent, unyielding shield. The crown responded to her, not to dark magic, but to something else. His eyes, usually a placid brown, now held a glint of the same golden light that had emanated from the crown, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift that only Alara seemed to notice. A strange current of understanding passed between them, a silent recognition that defied logic or explanation. Seraphina, momentarily stunned by Theron's intervention, recovered quickly. "Your Majesty," she cried, her voice laced with outrage. "She has defiled the sacred artifact. She is a threat to the kingdom, to us." She gestured wildly towards the still glowing crown, as if it were a harbinger of doom. "She must be imprisoned, questioned." Lord Valerius, emboldened by Seraphina's fervour, echoed, "Indeed, King Theron, for the stability of the realm, this incident must be understood, and the perpetrator punished." His eyes narrowed, assessing Theron with a sudden shrewd suspicion that Theron did not miss. Theron turned to face them, his expression unreadable. "She will remain in the castle," he declared, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Under my personal protection. We will discover what transpired here. The crown of Eldoria has not reacted in such a manner for centuries. It is not a curse, but an omen. And an omen requires understanding, not immediate condemnation." A collective murmur rippled through the court. The king's decree was baffling. To shield a mere servant accused of sorcery against the outrage of his intended queen and his most influential counsellors. It was unprecedented. Seraphina's face contorted in a silent snarl of fury, her carefully constructed composure threatening to shatter. Lord Valerius's jaw tightened, his brow furrowed with a mixture of confusion and growing unease. Theron's gaze swept across the bewildered faces of his court, landing briefly on Seraphina's furious eyes before returning to Alara. "Take her to the royal chambers," he instructed a startled guard, his voice gentler now, though still firm. "Ensure she is comfortable and unharmed. And inform the royal scribes. I want every legend, every prophecy concerning the crown of Eldoria brought to me at once." The court remained a tableau of stunned silence, save for the faint, almost imperceptible shimmering that still clung to Alara, a testament to the inexplicable event that had just redefined their king, their kingdom, and the humble servant girl at its heart. Whispers and scrutiny. The opulent chambers assigned to Alara felt more like a gilded cage than a sanctuary, gone with the familiar scrub brushes and the comforting scent of beeswax. In their place, silk drapes and polished mahogany offered no solace. Every shadow seemed to hold a pair of eyes, every hushed conversation beyond her door a judgment. The faint golden shimmer that still occasionally flickered around her skin, a residual echo of the crown's power, only amplified her unease. She ate alone, walked with a guard at a respectful but constant distance, and spent her days gazing out at the bustling courtyard, a world she was no longer truly a part of, nor truly apart from. Downstairs, the whispers of the court were a venomous tide, expertly steered by Lady Seraphina. With a charming smile and a sorrowful shake of her head, she glided through the gilded halls, a vision in sapphire and lace. "Such a tragedy," she'd sigh to a duchess, her voice a delicate bell. "For a simple girl to become entangled in dark magic. Poor King Theron, burdened with such an ill omen on the eve of our union." To a baron she'd confide with a knowing glance. "They say her eyes glowed, you know. A witch, surely. A threat to Eldoria itself." Her words, carefully crafted and delivered with feigned reluctance, sank deep into the fertile ground of fear and superstition, rooting Alara firmly as a harbinger of misfortune. Seraphina's hand would then lightly touch Theron's arm as he passed, a possessive gesture that spoke volumes without a single word. She was the rightful queen, and Elara the interloper. The growing disquiet reached a crescendo in Lord Valerius's study, a room steeped in the scent of old parchment and cold ambition. He stood before Theron, a formidable figure whose customary composure was now frayed by a palpable frustration. "Your Majesty," Valerius began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "This situation with the servant girl is untenable." The whispers are growing louder than the trumpets at morning assembly. Lady Seraphina is doing her best to quell them, but even her considerable grace cannot overcome the blatant disregard for tradition. Theron, seated behind his massive oak desk, merely steepled his fingers. The golden flecks in his eyes, more noticeable now, seemed to glint with an inner fire. "I am investigating the crown, Lord Valerius, as I decreed. It responded to Elara in a manner unseen in centuries. To simply banish her would be to ignore a profound truth." "A profound truth, or a dangerous delusion?" Valerius countered, his voice rising with uncharacteristic heat. "The council is in agreement. Her presence is a blight on our political stability. The alliance with House Seraphina is paramount. Her banishment would soothe the fears of the nobility, restore order, and secure your marriage." "It is the only sensible course." "Sensible?" Theron's tone was dangerously soft. "To cast out someone who may hold the key to Eldoria's very essence, because it is sensible." He rose, his stature suddenly imposing. "I will not be swayed by rumors or political convenience. The crown chose her, not I. And until I understand why, Elara remains under my protection." Valerius stared, a new, unsettling suspicion clouding his features. There was something different about Theron, a steel that had replaced his accustomed resignation. It was more than just protectiveness, it was almost possessive. And the subtle glow in his eyes, an unsettling mystery. "Your Majesty," he said, the words strained. "You risk more than just political stability. You risk the very trust of your council, and perhaps your future." His gaze lingered on Theron, a silent challenge in the air. The king's unwavering resolve and the strange light within him were beginning to concern Valerius far more than Elara herself. A king's curiosity. The oppressive silence of her gilded cage pressed in on Elara. The opulent chambers, once a dream, now felt like a silken trap. Whispers of witch and usurper slithered under the heavy doors, carried on the draughts of courtly disapproval. Her only solace was the lingering warmth of the crown, a phantom echo beneath her skin that pulsed faintly with a power she still couldn't comprehend. A crisp knock shattered the quiet. A guard, face impassive, announced, "His Majesty requests your presence in the royal study to discuss the palace's linen inventory." Elara blinked. Linen inventory? The absurdity of it was almost comical, yet Theron's command was absolute. She smoothed her borrowed gown, feeling the weight of the court's judgment even in her solitary walk through the hushed corridors. The royal study was a cavern of polished oak and ancient texts, smelling of parchment and beeswax. Theron stood by a vast window, the late afternoon sun casting his profile in gold. His eyes, when he turned, held that unsettling inner glow Valerius had noticed, a deeper fire than she remembered. "Elara," he began, his voice a low rumble. "Thank you for coming. I find myself in need of a fresh perspective on our upcoming linen procurement. A rather pressing matter, wouldn't you agree?" Elara could only nod, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. She knew he was lying, but the why remained shrouded. Their initial conversations were a dance of pretense and hesitant truths. Theron would summon her under a myriad of thinly veiled excuses, cataloguing ancient tapestries, advising on a new garden layout, even discussing the logistics of royal banquet seating. Each time, the true purpose glimmered beneath the surface. He would watch her, a quiet intensity in his gaze, observing her reactions, her small gestures. One afternoon, tasked with arranging a collection of exotic flowers for his desk, Elara found herself speaking without the usual tremor in her voice. She described the wild foxgloves that grew near her village, the way the morning dew clung to their bell-like petals, the earthy scent of the forest floor after a spring rain. Theron listened, not with the detached air of a king, but with an almost childlike curiosity. "You speak of such things with affection," he noted, his fingers tracing the spine of a leather-bound book. "Do you miss your village?" Elara paused, arranging a vibrant crimson bloom. "More than I can say, Your Majesty. It is a simple place, but honest." She dared a glance at him. "The air is clean, and the stars are brighter there." A faint smile touched Theron's lips, a rare sight that softened the hard lines of his jaw. "Brighter than Eldoria's heavens?" "Infinitely, Your Majesty." He learned of her quiet mornings tending a small garden, her evenings spent mending fabrics for the villagers, her simple joys derived from a well-baked loaf of bread or a clear sky. There was no ambition in her voice, no desire for power or finery, only a gentle longing for the life she'd known. This stark contrast to the grasping avarice of the court only deepened Theron's intrigue. He tested her, subtly at first. He spoke of the heavy weight of the crown, not the physical object, but the burden of kingship. He detailed the endless petitions, the intricate web of alliances, the constant pressure to maintain peace. He expected a reaction, awe, fear, perhaps even a hint of calculated flattery. Instead, Elara listened with a quiet empathy, her eyes reflecting a profound understanding that startled him. "It sounds lonely, Your Majesty," she offered once, her voice barely a whisper. "To bear such a weight alone." He looked at her, truly looked at her, seeing past the servant's garb, past the court's judgment. He saw a genuine, unassuming kindness, a spirit unmarred by cynicism. Her words, so simple, resonated within him, touching a core of isolation he rarely acknowledged. His conversations with Elara became less about pretense and more about a nascent, unspoken connection. He found himself drawn to her guileless nature, a refreshing balm against the endless machinations of his court. He began to discern the subtle shifts in her demeanor, the way her eyes would light up when speaking of nature, the quiet grace in her movements. He saw no witch, no usurper, only a woman whose innocence seemed to have awakened something ancient and powerful within the crown itself, and, in doing so, within him. The court continued to seethe with rumours, Lady Seraphina's whispers growing louder, Lord Valerius's frown deepening with each passing day. Yet Theron's resolve only hardened. He knew, with an instinct deeper than reason, that Elara was not a threat to Eldoria, but something else entirely, and he intended to find out what. The late afternoon sun, usually a welcome guest, now felt like a prying eye as Elara navigated the labyrinthine corridors. Her summons to the king's private study had become a clandestine ritual, a hushed affair whispered by trusted guards. Each meeting chipped away at the icy shell of court judgment that encased her. though the whispers and disdainful glances still followed her like shadows. Today, Theron was not seated behind his imposing desk, but stood by a tall, arched window, gazing out at the manicured gardens. The golden light caught the subtle threads of silver in his dark hair, lending him an air of weary regality. He turned as she entered, and for a fleeting moment, the usual guard in his eyes softened, replaced by a quiet intensity that always made her heart flutter. "Elara," he acknowledged, his voice a low rumble. "Come, observe the gardens with me. The roses are in full bloom." She walked to his side, acutely aware of the space between them, a chasm of rank and expectation. They stood in silence for a while, the murmur of the court a distant hum. Elara found herself drawn to the delicate petals of a scarlet rose, its vibrant colour a stark contrast to the muted tones of her current existence. Unbidden, a memory surfaced. "My mother grew roses," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Not as grand as these, of course. Smaller, but just as fragrant. I used to help her prune them, even though I was terrible at it. I always pricked my fingers." A small, genuine smile touched her lips, a rare sight in the palace. Theron turned his head, a faint, almost imperceptible curve forming on his own mouth. It wasn't the polite, practiced smile he offered to his courtiers, but something deeper, more unguarded. "And did you learn to avoid the thorns?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Eventually," she admitted, looking up at him. Their eyes met, and in the depths of his, she saw a flicker of the same lonely understanding that often echoed in her own heart. He reached out, his hand moving towards the rose Elara had been admiring. As he pointed to a particularly lush bloom, his fingers brushed against hers. A jolt, like static electricity, shot through Elara's arm. It wasn't painful, but a sudden, unexpected warmth that spread through her veins. Theron's eyes widened fractionally, and his hand recoiled as swiftly as it had approached, though a faint, intriguing glow seemed to ignite in his pupils for a heartbeat. A blush crept up Elara's neck, and she quickly averted her gaze, her pulse quickening. The air thickened, charged with an unspoken awareness. Theron cleared his throat, the moment broken, but not entirely dissipated. "The crown. It remains quiet for you?" he asked, his voice a little rougher than before. Elara nodded, pressing her palm to her chest where the crown, now a warm presence beneath her borrowed gown, pulsed faintly. "It feels protective," she confessed, meeting his gaze again, her honesty unblemished by guile. "Like it understands I'm scared." A shadow crossed Theron's face, a flash of something akin to anger or frustration. "You should not have to be scared," he stated, his voice firm, edged with a possessiveness that startled her. He stepped closer, his presence radiating an almost palpable heat. "I will not allow it." His resolve, a silent promise, wrapped around her, a stark contrast to the venomous whispers of the court. In that moment, surrounded by the opulent silence of the royal study, Elara felt a peculiar tenderness bloom within her, a dangerous, thrilling thing that warred with the memory of her simple, forgotten life. Theron, too, seemed caught in the spell. His gaze lingered on her, an unreadable depth in his eyes, a silent testament to the fragile, forbidden connection sparking between them. The crown, nestled against Elara's skin, hummed with a soft, resonant warmth, an ancient witness to the forbidden glimmers of a destiny unfolding. Shadows of conspiracy. The scent of stale parchment and hushed ambition hung heavy in Lady Seraphina's private chambers. Outside, the twilight deepened, painting the castle windows in shades of bruised plum. Inside, The flickering candelabra cast dancing shadows, elongating Lord Valerius's already imposing figure as he paced before her. His brow was furrowed, a vein throbbing faintly at his temple. "This cannot continue, Seraphina," Valerius rasped, his voice a low growl that barely disturbed the silence. "The girl, she is a cancerous growth on the very heart of the court. Theron's attention is a distraction we cannot afford, not with the alliances we've painstakingly built." He paused, turning to face her, his eyes narrowed with a new, unsettling suspicion. And his eyes, did you notice them today? A strange glow, almost feral. It's as if that peasant girl has bewitched him. Seraphina, seated elegantly on a velvet chaise, sipped slowly from a cup of spiced wine, her gaze distant. Bewitched him, or simply enlightened him to a different path? Her tone was laced with a chilling sarcasm. Regardless, the outcome is the same. My position, your influence, the stability of Eldoria itself, all imperiled by a common servant girl and an ancient, unpredictable crown. Her fingers tightened around the delicate ceramic. Whispers are turning to shouts, Valerius. The court is a nest of vipers, and Alara's presence only stirs them further. Some are even questioning Theron's judgment. Valerius stopped pacing, a dangerous glint entering his eyes. Then we must act. Banishment is no longer enough. She has touched the crown. That makes her a threat to the lineage, a symbol of disruption. She must be removed, permanently. He slammed a fist lightly on a nearby table, making a quill jump. And in a way that leaves no doubt as to her villainy, a way that Theron cannot ignore or defend. Seraphina offered a thin, predatory smile. Indeed. A crime so heinous, so undeniable, that even Theron's newfound affections would be powerless against the judgment of the court and the will of the people. She set her cup down with a decisive click. Treason. It is the only charge that warrants an immediate and irreversible remedy. Valerius's lips curved into a slow, satisfied grin. Treason. Excellent. But what evidence? We cannot simply accuse her. Of course not, Seraphina purred, rising and moving to a lacquered cabinet. She opened it, revealing a hidden compartment. From within, she extracted a rolled parchment, brittle with age and sealed with a forgotten insignia. This, my dear lord, is a relic, a letter forged long ago by a disgruntled scribe intended to implicate a minor noble in a plot against the previous king. It was never used, deemed too risky at the time, but with a few alterations, it can be repurposed. She unfurled the parchment, its ancient script a dark contrast against the faded paper. We will discover this in Alara's possession. A letter detailing her supposed correspondence with an enemy kingdom, plotting Theron's downfall. Valerius's eyes gleamed with approval. Brilliant. And who will plant it? It must be someone above suspicion, yet utterly loyal to you. Seraphina's gaze drifted to a small, unassuming bell on her desk. I have just the person. A chambermaid, Anya. Quiet, observant, and fiercely devoted to me. She has access to Alara's quarters, as she does with all the servants. She picked up the bell, its polished surface reflecting the candlelight. Anya will be tasked with a delicate mission. She will observe Alara's movements, note her routines, and at the opportune moment, when Alara is absent, she will place this letter within her belongings, perhaps tucked into a linen chest or hidden beneath a stack of mended garments. Somewhere it will eventually be found, but not immediately, allowing the seeds of suspicion to germinate. Anya, a wisp of a girl with eyes that missed nothing, appeared silently at the chamber door, summoned by the soft chime. Serafina fixed her with an intense, unwavering stare. Anya, a matter of utmost importance has arisen. A threat to the stability of the crown, concealed within the very walls of this castle. You, my dear, have a crucial role to play in safeguarding our future. Serafina's voice was a silken thread, weaving a narrative of duty and loyalty that Anya, ever eager to please her mistress, would undoubtedly embrace. There is a document that must be discreetly placed where it can be discovered at the appropriate time. Within the quarters of the servant girl, Elara. Are you prepared to serve Eldoria, Anya? Anya's eyes, wide and earnest, met Serafina's. Yes, Lady Serafina. I am ready. The die was cast. The shadows in Serafina's chambers seemed to deepen, no longer just from the fading light, but from the sinister plot now set in motion. Echoes of prophecy. The oppressive weight of the court's disdain pressed down on Elara like a physical shroud. Every whispered conversation seemed to sting, every sidelong glance a judgment. Theron's protective presence, while a balm, also felt like a gilded cage, isolating her further. She found herself drawn, increasingly, to the hushed sanctity of the royal library. It was a labyrinth of towering shelves, each promising escape into forgotten worlds. The scent of aged parchment and beeswax was a comforting antidote to the cloying perfumes of court ladies and the metallic tang of ambition. Most evenings, after her duties were technically complete, Elara would slip past the sleepy guards, her soft slippers making no sound on the polished marble floors. She would navigate the endless rows, her fingers tracing the spines of books, seeking a sanctuary from the relentless scrutiny. Tonight, the silence of the library felt particularly profound, amplifying her own gnawing loneliness. She imagined the courtiers, gathered in their gilded halls, undoubtedly dissecting her every move, her every breath. The thought was a cold knot in her stomach. She wandered deeper than usual, past the well-worn histories and philosophical treatises. A faint, earthy scent, distinct from the usual library aroma, piqued her curiosity. It led her to a dimly lit alcove, almost hidden behind a colossal globe of the known world. Here, the shelves were dustier, the books larger, their bindings faded and cracked. Cobwebs, like delicate lace, draped over several titles. It felt like stepping into a forgotten corner of time. Her gaze snagged on a tome unlike any she'd seen. Its cover was not leather, but a dark, polished wood, inlaid with intricate silver symbols that seemed to writhe in the faint light. There was no title, only a single, stylized mark at its center. A crown, encircled by a faint, shimmering light. A prickle ran down her spine. With trembling hands, she pulled it from its resting place. A small cloud of dust erupted, making her cough. Inside, the pages were thick and brittle, adorned with hand-drawn illustrations and elegant, archaic script. The language was almost unintelligible, yet a strange familiarity resonated within her. She recognized fragments, words that echoed in the deepest recesses of her memory, whispers from long-forgotten nursery rhymes. After several tense moments of deciphering, a passage slowly revealed itself, its meaning seeping into her consciousness with chilling clarity. When Eldoria's heart grows dim and alliances fray, a light shall rise, not from noble lineage, but from humble clay. The crown, by ancient blood unbound, shall choose its queen from hallowed ground. Her touch, a beacon, her spirit true, shall mend what's broken, and forge anew. For she who wields the crown's own flame bears the mark of the forgotten name. Ilara's breath hitched. The crown's own flame. The words reverberated in her mind, conjuring the searing golden light that had erupted the moment her fingers had brushed the ancient artifact. Her touch, a beacon, her spirit, true. A cold dread began to coil within her. Could this be about her? The forgotten name and ancient blood unbound stirred a half-remembered lullaby from her childhood, a song her grandmother had hummed, speaking of a queen from a forgotten line, chosen not by birthright, but by destiny. A growing realization, both terrifying and exhilarating, took root. This wasn't just a story, it was a prophecy. And the crown of Eldoria, in its infinite mysterious wisdom, had chosen her. A common servant, tangled in a web of court intrigue, now burdened with a destiny that threatened to shatter her world and, perhaps, reshape an entire kingdom. The implications were vast, overwhelming. Fear, sharp and cold, pierced through the awe. This wasn't just about Theron, or Valerius, or Seraphina anymore. This was about something far greater, something she was completely unprepared for. The accusation of theft. The oppressive stillness of the throne room was usually broken only by the rustle of silk or a hushed cough. Today, however, a palpable tension hummed beneath the gilded ceilings, thick as the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. Ilara, summoned for some unspecified duty, stood near the periphery, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The ancient book's prophecy, etched into her mind, now felt less like a distant myth and more like a crushing weight. She clutched her hands, a nervous habit she'd never quite broken, her gaze flitting towards the polished marble floor. King Theron sat upon the throne, his posture regal, yet his eyes, when they occasionally met hers across the room, held a depth she couldn't quite decipher, a flicker of an inner fire that seemed to grow brighter with each passing day. He was listening, or pretending to listen, to Lord Valerius's droning report on granary yields. Valerius, ever the picture of calculated propriety, kept glancing at Lady Seraphina, who stood a little apart, her crimson gown a stark splash of colour against the muted tapestries. A predatory glint in her eyes sent a shiver down Ilara's spine. Then Seraphina moved. With a dramatic sweep of her arm, she stepped forward, interrupting Valerius mid-sentence. The entire court seemed to hold its breath. "Your Majesty," her voice, usually honeyed, now carried a sharp edge that cut through the air. "I bring a grave matter to your attention, a matter of honour and of the crown's own security." Theron's brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. "Speak, Lady Seraphina." Her gaze, cold and unwavering, locked onto Ilara. "It has come to my attention, through diligent observation and undeniable evidence, that the servant girl, Ilara, has been pilfering from the royal treasury. Specifically, the emerald pendant gifted to Her Majesty, Queen Isolde, on her coronation day. A jewel of immense historical and monetary value, now conspicuously absent. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled courtiers. Ilara's blood ran cold. The emerald pendant? She had never even laid eyes on the Queen's jewels, let alone touched them. Her mind reeled, the prophecy's words momentarily eclipsed by a surge of pure, unadulterated fear. Her fingers trembled so violently she had to press them against her thighs to steady them. Lord Valerius, looking suitably grave, added, "Indeed, Your Majesty, such a brazen act of theft, especially of an item of such significance, cannot be overlooked. It speaks to a deeper malaise, perhaps even disloyalty." He caught Ilara's eye, a flicker of satisfaction barely hidden behind his concern. Theron's gaze, now devoid of its usual warmth, fixed on Ilara. His jaw was tight, a muscle twitching near his temple. He knew this was a fabrication, a thinly veiled attack, but the public nature of the accusation demanded a response. His voice, when he spoke, was low but resonated with authority. "Ilara, do you deny these charges?" Her throat was tight, her voice a mere whisper. I deny them, Your Majesty. I have never stolen anything in my life. I wouldn't dare." Seraphina scoffed. "A common thief's plea. We found the pendant, Your Majesty, hidden in her meagre quarters, tucked beneath her straw mattress. A pathetic attempt to conceal her crime." She gestured to a guard, who stepped forward, holding aloft a small velvet pouch. With a flourish, he opened it, revealing a magnificent emerald sparkling malevolently in the light. Panic seized Ilara. "No!" she wanted to scream, to rail against the injustice, but her voice failed her. The carefully constructed piece she had found in the library, the quiet acceptance of her destiny, shattered into a million pieces. This wasn't about a duel, this was about destroying her. Theron's eyes narrowed, a silent battle raging behind them. He wanted to dismiss the absurd accusation, to shield her. But the weight of his crown, the expectant faces of his court, held him captive. To ignore such an accusation, especially with evidence presented so publicly, would be to undermine his own authority, to appear weak. He saw the gleam of triumph in Seraphina's eyes, the subtle smirk on Valerius's lips. This was a trap. "Guards!" Theron's voice was clipped, betraying nothing of the inferno raging within him. "Apprehend the accused." Before Ilara could even fully process the command, 2 burly royal guards were upon her, their hands clamping down on her arms with brutal efficiency. The rough fabric of their uniforms chafed against her skin. She gasped, a cry catching in her throat as they began to drag her away. Her eyes, wide with terror, met Theron's one last time. In their depths, she saw not condemnation, but a fierce, protective fire, burning brighter than ever before, a promise unspoken, yet profoundly felt. But it wasn't enough. Not now. The heavy oak doors of the throne room slammed shut behind her, plunging her into the cold reality of her arrest. The prophecy, the crown, her destiny, all of it felt impossibly distant, a cruel mirage in a world determined to see her fall. The Grand Council chamber's vaulted ceiling seemed to press down on Ilara, the air growing thin with the weight of expectation. 2 grim-faced royal guards, their breastplates mirroring the torchlight's dance, flanked her before the dais. A murmuring tide of anxious faces filled the chamber, their collective gaze a palpable weight. King Theron, an immutable figure on his throne, maintained an unreadable visage, yet Ilara sensed the silent quake of his internal struggle across the expanse of polished marble. Lord Valerius, his voice imbued with a theatrical resonance, presented his findings. "Your Majesty, esteemed council, the evidence is damning. While adequate, the granary yields in the eastern provinces show a worrying deficit. And yet, this servant girl, Ilara, was apprehended possessing a trinket of immense value, the Queen's very own emerald pendant. A pendant that vanished from the royal chambers the very day the deficit was reported." He gestured to a small, velvet cushion where the emerald, undeniably real, pulsed with an almost malevolent green light, its brilliance mocking Ilara's humble origins. "Explain yourself, girl," Valerius demanded, his piercing gaze impaling her. Ilara's response, though soft, cut through the hushed chamber with surprising clarity. "I did not steal it, my lord. It was placed in my satchel. I swear it on my life,
and on the ancient light that binds this kingdom. Her wide, earnest eyes sought Theron's, a silent supplication for understanding.
A ripple of disbelief spread through the onlookers. How could a simple servant girl invoke ancient light, the very magic that wove Eldoria together? Lady Seraphina, nestled among the noblewomen, delivered a dismissive sniff, a subtle flick of her wrist quelling the whispers nearby. Her thin, triumphant smile felt like a dagger to Alara's heart. Theron felt the scrutiny of every eye, every hushed word, every clamour for justice. His gaze darted from the emerald to Alara, then to Valerius, whose calculated performance reeked of an orchestrated plot. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him, Alara was innocent. But the evidence, meticulously planted, was overwhelming. The court demanded swift, decisive action. To acquit her would be to defy the very principles of justice he was sworn to uphold, to undermine his authority, and to invite open rebellion. To condemn her, the thought was a physical ache in his chest. Duty or truth? The question hammered in his mind. His kingdom or her life? The political marriage to Lady Seraphina was already strained. This scandal, if mishandled, could shatter the fragile peace. He saw the glint in Seraphina's eyes, the subtle satisfaction on Valerius's face. They wanted Alara gone, silenced, erased. And he was being forced to be the instrument of their will. He recalled the touch of her hand, the searing warmth of the crown, the impossible connection that had sparked between them. It was a bond defying logic, a truth whispered by ancient magic, a destiny he was only beginning to grasp. How could he abandon that, abandon her, to the machinations of those who sought only power? But the shouts swelled. "Thief! Traitor! Punish her, your majesty!" "Your majesty," Valerius pressed, sensing the king's hesitation. "The law is clear. Theft from the crown is a capital offence. To allow this transgression to stand unpunished would be to invite chaos, to declare that our laws are but suggestions." Theron's jaw tightened. He could feel the eyes of the entire court, the kingdom itself, upon him. This transcended Alara. It touched the very fabric of his rule. The political fallout of showing leniency, of openly defying the clear evidence, would be catastrophic. His nascent affection for Alara, his burgeoning belief in her connection to the crown, felt like a fragile flame against a gale-force wind. He took a slow, deliberate breath, his gaze sweeping over the expectant faces. He had to act. He had to choose. The decision he made now would define not only his reign, but the very future of Eldoria. And Alara, standing before him, her fear evident but her spirit unbowed, shone like a beacon in the storm, a silent reminder of the truth he was being forced to betray. The crown's judgment. A suffocating stillness descended upon the Grand Council. King Theron's gaze, usually a bastion of composure, betrayed an inner turmoil. The emerald pendant, a silent accuser of Alara's alleged transgression, gleamed ominously on the polished oak, reflecting the fitful torchlight. Lord Valerius's smug satisfaction was a palpable toxin in the air, subtly mirrored in Lady Seraphina's composed features. "The evidence is irrefutable, Your Majesty," Valerius pressed, his voice laced with feigned sorrow. "The crown demands justice. Our granaries dwindle, the populace murmurs. This servant, she has sullied the palace's good name." Alara stood, head bowed, yet her spirit, a tenacious spark against a gathering storm, refused to yield. "By the ancient stars, I swear," she whispered, her voice surprisingly unwavering. I never touched that pendant. The granary, too, remains a mystery to me. Theron's jaw tightened. He saw not a thief, but the woman whose touch had rekindled the crown's dormant power, whose presence resonated with a forgotten magic. To condemn her was to diminish a part of himself, to deny a truth that pulsed in his very veins. Yet, to defy the council, to dismiss Valerius's meticulously constructed case, risked plunging the kingdom into instability, exposing a vulnerability it could ill afford. He noted the predatory gleam in Valerius's eyes, the barely veiled ambition. This extended beyond a mere trinket. It was a bid for control, a direct challenge to his authority. He drew a slow, deliberate breath, the air thick with apprehension. The silence stretched, a taut wire threatening to snap. Then his voice, though soft, possessed an unexpected resonance, quelling every whisper, every rustle of silk. Lord Valerius invokes the crown's demand for justice, Theron began, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the councillors. And so, the crown shall dispense it. A ripple of bewilderment spread through the chamber. Valerius frowned, his confident posture subtly faltering. "Bring forth the crown of Eldoria," Theron declared, his voice rising, imbued with a strange, undeniable power. "Let it decide who truly merits service to this kingdom. Let it unveil its true queen." A collective gasp swept the chamber. Lady Seraphina's carefully constructed composure shattered, replaced by open-mouthed shock that quickly soured into a furious glare. Lord Valerius blanched, his eyes widening with disbelief and dawning alarm. Whispers erupted, a torrent of disbelief and outrage. The king had just escalated a simple theft accusation into an unthinkable challenge to tradition, to prophecy itself. Two royal guards, their faces etched with the gravity of their unusual charge, re-entered the council chamber. Between them, nestled on a velvet cushion, carried with utmost reverence, rested the crown of Eldoria. Its ancient gold gleamed dully in the torchlight, studded with gems that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the light. A palpable energy emanated from it, an aura of timeless power that hushed the renewed murmurs. All eyes were drawn to its silent, formidable presence. The very air in the room thickened, crackling with unseen forces. Theron gestured towards Ilara, his eyes fixed on her, a silent plea and promise in their depths. "Approach, Ilara." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Ilara felt every eye in the room bore into her. Fear wrestled with a strange magnetic pull. She took a hesitant step, then another, her simple servant's tunic feeling heavy, coarse, and utterly out of place. Each slow, measured pace echoed in the deafening silence. As she neared the pedestal where the crown rested, a warmth spread through her veins, a tingling sensation in her fingertips. The crown seemed to pulse, a faint light emanating from its ancient metal. When she was but a few feet away, the crown lifted from its cushion, as if by an unseen hand. It hovered, spinning slowly, then, with an almost imperceptible hum, it descended. It settled upon Ilara's brow, a perfect fit. A blinding white light erupted from the crown, engulfing Ilara completely. The chamber was flooded, obliterating shadows, stifling every gasping breath. Ilara cried out, not in pain, but in awe, a surge of power coursing through her. Her simple tunic shimmered, transformed. The coarse fabric dissolved, replaced by a gown of ethereal white silk, intricately embroidered with silver threads that seemed to ripple like moonlight on water. Her usually unkempt hair, now unbound, cascaded around her shoulders, luminous from within. Her eyes, once downcast, lifted, blazing with a fierce, ancient knowing. The emerald pendant, forgotten by all, lay on the table, suddenly dull and insignificant.
The light slowly receded, leaving Alara standing before them, no longer a servant, but a queen. The crown of Eldoria rested upon her head, glowing with a soft, steady brilliance that proclaimed an undeniable truth. The Grand Council, speechless and stunned, stared at the impossible vision. Lord Valerius's face was a mask of utter horror, while Lady Seraphina choked back a strangled cry, her face contorted in a mixture of disbelief and pure, unadulterated fury. Destiny revealed. The crown, now resting upon Alara's brow, pulsed with an inner light that seemed to draw the very essence from the air. Ancient symbols, previously unnoticed, began to shimmer, not with the gold of the metal itself, but with an ethereal blue luminescence that snaked across the filigree. They weren't merely decorative, they were a living script, each glyph igniting in turn, tracing a genealogy visible only to those touched by its magic.
The radiant light intensified, projecting shimmering images into the stunned silence of the council chamber. First, a stylized depiction of the first queen, Lyra, her face a serene echo of Alara's own. Then, a succession of queens, each with a subtle, unmistakable familial resemblance. The progression moved with blinding speed, a silent tapestry weaving through centuries, finally culminating in a single, unadorned image. A small, intricately carved wooden bird, identical to the one Alara had worn on a simple leather thong around her neck since childhood. A gasp rippled through the hall as the blue light flared one last time, then receded, leaving the crown gleaming with renewed brilliance on Alara's head. A collective intake of breath was the only sound. Lady Seraphina, her usually placid features contorted in a mask of disbelief, rose halfway from her seat before collapsing back, her eyes wide and fixed on Alara. Her carefully constructed composure had shattered, revealing a raw fury beneath. Lord Valerius, who had moments before been smugly orchestrating Alara's downfall, now stood frozen, a grotesque rictus of horror twisting his mouth. The weight of his ambition, once a palpable force, now seemed to crush him into insignificance. The throne room, once a stage for his machinations, had become his tomb. King Theron, however, looked not at the images, nor at the aghast faces of his council. His gaze, piercing and unwavering, was fixed solely on Alara. He saw not the servant girl, not the accused, but the radiant woman before him, bathed in the crown's truth. A profound certainty settled within him, a realization that transcended all doubt, all political maneuvering, all ingrained tradition. He stepped forward, his boots echoing in the profound quiet, until he stood directly before her, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek, oblivious to the eyes that watched their every move. For generations, Theron's voice resonated, firm and clear, cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. The crown of Eldoria has chosen its true leader, its rightful queen. It has not merely chosen a consort, but one whose very blood remembers the ancient pact, one whose spirit aligns with the kingdom's deepest magic. He swept his gaze across the council, his eyes lingering on Valerius and Seraphina. You sought to accuse, to condemn, to manipulate. You spoke of theft and betrayal, of disrupting tradition. But the crown, in its infinite wisdom, has spoken a truth far greater than any of your whispered lies. He turned back to Alara, his thumb gently caressing her skin. This crown has declared her lineage, revealed the prophecy. It has named her not merely a queen by marriage, but a queen by right, by blood. by destiny. She is the true heart of Eldoria, the very essence of its future. His voice deepened, a powerful declaration that brooked no argument. Let no one question this truth, for to do so is to question Eldoria itself. Elara is my queen, my true queen. And by the sacred magic of this land, by the will of the crown, and by my own heart, I choose her, now and forever. A new reign. The great hall, once a crucible of doubt and accusation, now shimmered with an entirely different kind of energy. Sunlight, streaming through the arched windows, illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny witness to the unfolding dawn of a new era. At the heart of it all stood Elara, no longer the servant girl, but the queen of Eldoria. The crown, still resting upon her head, seemed to glow faintly, an outward manifestation of the destiny it had so unequivocally affirmed. Beside her, King Theron's presence was a rock, his hand resting lightly on her back, a gesture both protective and profoundly possessive. His gaze, usually guarded, now held an unbridled pride as he surveyed the assembled court. The hushed reverence that had replaced the earlier chaos was a testament to the seismic shift that had just occurred. Lady Seraphina, her face a mask of barely contained fury, stood rigid amongst the councillors, her eyes burning holes into Elara. Lord Valerius, pale and visibly trembling, clutched the hilt of his ceremonial dagger, his grand ambitions reduced to ash in a single blinding flash of ancient magic. Theron's voice, deep and resonant, cut through the silence. "The crown has spoken. Eldoria has its true queen." He paused, letting the words settle, their weight immeasurable. "And I, Theron, King of Eldoria, stand beside her. Not merely as her king, but as her chosen." The last word, though softly spoken, echoed with the force of a decree. Elara felt a warmth spread through her, not just from Theron's touch, but from the realization that their forbidden connection was now the very foundation of their reign. Their first official appearance together, as king and queen, was a spectacle of quiet power. They moved with an unspoken synchronicity, each step a testament to the bond that had blossomed amidst adversity. As they walked through the bustling palace corridors later that day, the air crackled with anticipation. Servants, guards, even minor nobles offered deep bows, their gazes respectful, curious, and undeniably hopeful. The whispers that followed them were no longer of scandal, but of prophecy fulfilled. In the royal chambers, overlooking the sprawling capital bathed in the afternoon sun, Theron turned to Elara. "A new reign, my queen," he murmured, his thumb tracing the delicate curve of her jaw. "What do you envision for our kingdom?" Elara's gaze swept across the vibrant cityscape, her mind already racing with ideas that had been nascent dreams in her servant days. "Justice, Theron," she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. "True justice, not just for the powerful, but for every soul in Eldoria. And knowledge, libraries, schools, accessible to all. The old ways of rigid hierarchy and closed-door council meetings must yield to transparency and genuine counsel." Theron's smile was wide, a genuine expression of admiration. "A future I eagerly anticipate building with you." He held her gaze, a profound understanding passing between them. Their love, born in secrecy and defiance, had become the very engine of their shared purpose. The subtle shift in power dynamics was palpable even within the day. Council meetings, once dominated by the likes of Valerius and Seraphina, now featured a king who listened intently to Elara,
often deferring to her insightful questions and quiet observations. Lord Valerius, after a terse public apology forced by Theron, was relegated to obscure administrative tasks, his usually booming voice reduced to mumbled agreements. Lady Seraphina, though still seated amongst the council, found her opinions met with a new, collective skepticism. Her influence, once pervasive, had begun to fray, much like a moth-eaten tapestry. The younger, more progressive councillors, who had watched Ilara's ordeal with a mix of fear and quiet sympathy, now found their voices gaining strength, their suggestions met with more open minds. The kingdom itself seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The tales of the crown's miraculous affirmation spread like wildfire, reaching even the most remote villages. The people, long weary of political manoeuvring and the perceived coldness of the old guard, embraced the idea of a queen chosen by destiny, a queen who had risen from their own ranks. Hope, a commodity often scarce in Eldoria, began to bloom anew. As evening fell, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold, Ilara stood on the royal balcony, Theron by her side. The city lights twinkled below, a vast, living tapestry. She placed her hand over his, feeling the warmth of his skin, the strength of his resolve. "This is only the beginning, isn't it?" she whispered, a sense of both exhilaration and daunting responsibility swelling within her. Theron squeezed her hand. "The true beginning, my love. And together, we will write a legacy that Eldoria will never forget." His words were not a promise but a declaration, sealing their alliance not just as rulers, but as two souls bound by destiny, ready to forge a new future.